My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. When we think of death, we think of the ultimate fate awaiting us all. Death does not discriminate, and all are equal in the eyes of death. Many regard the grim reaper as the symbol of death, robed, hooded, and carrying the harvest scythe. But for millions around the world, there's a feminine personification of death, and she is called Santa Muerte. She is associated with safe passage to the afterlife and is the patron saint of people who live on the fringes of society, who often face violence and death. Her followers have also come to include the LGBT community and people who have been marginalized or whose jobs put them at a risk of death, including the military and police. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Tracey Rollin, is the administrator of the Lovely Mother Death Facebook group, a 69,000-member community of Santa Muerte devotees. A practitioner of chaos magic and witchcraft for more than 20 years, Tracey has dedicated herself to the advancement of consciousness, spiritual understanding, and personal power. Tracey is also a registered nurse with years of emergency room and trauma experience. She joins us tonight to discuss her just-published Red Wheel Weiser book, Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, and Magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. Please welcome Tracey Rollin. Good evening, Tracey.
Hello, Victor. How are you?
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us this evening to talk about this fascinating topic.
Thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I look forward to it.
So, Tracey, let's start with your formative years and faith background. What was your early life like?
My early life was a little on the rough side. It was all right in the beginning. My mother is a German immigrant. She's from Bavaria. My father is an adoptee. We're not really sure who his people are. I was raised Catholic by my mother, and my mother also raised me with a variety of traditional northern pagan beliefs. She remembers when she was a small child, she would do things like on May Day have to go and circle the maypole and say prayers to Freya, in addition to her Catholic, prayers that she would say on that day. And that was the kind of upbringing that I had. When I was about 7 years old, my family experienced a personal tragedy, and my mother chose to appeal to certain Catholic saints in order to get us out of the tragedy, which is common with Catholics. And I was raised kind of in that environment a lot. A lot of my early formative years, ones I really remember, 7, 8, 9 years old, I was constantly being taken to church. We're going to Mass several times a week. It was CCD several times a week. Catholic catechism is what it was. Religious training basically before you could take your first communion or later on your confirmation. I was half raised by nuns, I'm telling you.
And in that raising in the Catholic faith, you were also exposed to the saints. What was that like for you?
It was actually sort of a very interesting experience. You see, I'd go to catechism several times a week to receive religious training from the nuns. And what they would do is they would tell you that God, of course, was in his heaven and that he had all the power in the world, but that he was kind of an abstract kind of figure, okay? And that the Virgin Mary was actually so necessary in order to bring him into mortal form in the form of Jesus. Now, of course, to an adult, this makes a lot of sense, but when you're 7 or 8, God doesn't really have a whole lot of meaning in a way. I mean, they show you a picture in the Bible, it's some guy on a throne in a robe, and then that's it, What they will show you a lot of, though, is a lot of Catholic saints. The Catholics have a lot of them. There's over 1,500 officially recognized saints. They've got a saint for absolutely everything. They've got a saint for schoolwork. They've got a saint for home problems. They've got a saint for finding a job. They've got a saint for fishermen. If you're a tailor, there is a saint specifically for you, all right? So, in part of Catholic religious education, they have to introduce you to this huge pantheon, if you would, of religious figures, and that's exactly what they did. You'd come in, and the nuns would start teaching you about Saint so-and-so, and they give you a little prayer card, a novena card, a little picture of the saint on the front and prayer on the back. And if you memorize the prayers, they'd give you candy. And of course, well, if you're 9, you memorize the prayers to get the candies. You learn a lot about the saints, but you don't really seem to focus a whole lot on God. And that's sort of what it was like. So working with saints seemed very familiar to me, even like around the Catholic faith and as I grew in my teenage years.
So, Tracey, how did your Catholic upbringing lead you to your interest in magic and witchcraft?
A lot of general Catholic practices, such as the use of novena candles when communicating with saints, actually closely resemble a lot of folk European practical techniques. For example, if I was going to light a candle to St. Joseph, the patron saint of carpenters and people who are looking for employment, looking for a job, I'd take a candle with St. Joseph's picture on it and say a prayer to him and hopefully get a job. Now, if I go and I light a candle to the Greek god Hephaestus, the god of the forge, because I'm looking for a job, what difference is there? There isn't one really in my mind, but one makes you Catholic, one makes you a witch.
And isn't it true, though, that most of the foundational things that are found in all of the major faiths really had their foundation in paganism?
I would absolutely agree with that. As a matter of fact, one of the most foundational figures in the Catholic faith, the Virgin Mary, who is considered the new Eve and the bridge between, mankind and God, since she was one who gave birth to Jesus, is actually, if you look back into her own mythology, is thought to have been based on a woman who was actually a cultist of Isis, and the Virgin Mary herself to be either the Egyptian goddess Isis or, interestingly, an import from India in the form of a goddess named Mariamne, which is also an alternate name for Mary. So it's very interesting, but very common.
And so you have this practice where you're using the candles or doing novenas, using the images of the various saints. And then how does that translate into your practice of magic?
Well, I'll go ahead and I'll use candles frequently in a way that a lot of magicians will use them. For example, I'm a chaos magician, so I tend to use a lot of sigils. So I'll think of candles as almost like lighting a fuse or setting a battery on top of something to power a spell. So I might put a sigil underneath the candle and then go and say something to a saint or to Santa Muerte in this particular case and say, hey, I want the sigil to happen quickly or whatever the case may be. Another way that you'll see that it impacts your practice is another thing that is common to use with novena candles is a rosary. Rosaries are, of course, very commonly associated with the Virgin Mary. And all they really are, if you look at their function, is since you say the Hail Mary, her prayer, over and over and over again, all it really is a spirit summoning device, okay? Now, if I go ahead and I take a bunch of meditation beads and I say to some spirit whose sacred number is, say, 75, his name 75 times, or prayer to him 75 times, well, I'm going to get his attention, right? That's what a rosary does. You can use it for anything. You could use a rosary to summon Isis if you wanted to, or Odin, or anybody. So,
now you mentioned sigils. For those who don't know, explain what a sigil is, please.
Sigils are a technique that is very common to chaos magicians. Chaos magicians tend to believe that what you think about your spell and the fact that you continuously have it in your mind, that you want a new job or you want a new girlfriend or boyfriend or something, can actually interfere with the casting of the spell because you keep fiddling with it, basically. So what a sigil actually does is it reduces your desire down to, usually it's a pictorial image. One of the common ways of doing it is taking all the words of your desire, like, I want a new boyfriend or what have you, and cross out repeating letters and then rearrange the letters to make some kind of sign. And your subconscious still recognizes what it is, but your conscious mind has kind of forgotten about it. All right. So then when you start activating the spell, it's activated in a sense more purely because you're not fiddling with it because you don't really remember what the jumble of letters is all about. Now,
you say you practice chaos magic. What is chaos magic?
Chaos magic is a more modern magical technique. Its advent, some people would say it'd be in the 1920s and 30s with Austin Osman Spares. Some would say it came more into itself in the 1960s and 70s, and certainly in the 80s with people like Peter Carroll and Phil Hine. But what it aims to do is to strip out a lot of... For example, earlier I mentioned that there really isn't a lot of difference between lighting a candle to the Virgin Mary and lighting a candle to, say, Odin, okay? What chaos magic aims to do is to strip out all of the explanations, and I hate to almost call it the flavor text, but all of the, it belongs to this mythology or belongs to that mythology, and just bring everything down to pure technique. Which is why you wind up having stripped down techniques such as taking sigils and simply, reducing your desire to a jumble of letters. That's a pretty basic form of magic if you think about it, but not really something people have ever really done. Well, so
what you're alluding to is intention over energy, basically.
That is absolutely correct. To me and to a lot of chaos magicians, it doesn't matter if you think of someone who classifies themselves as a classic European witch is equivalently no different than someone who classifies themselves as a Native American shaman. Okay, they're still able to apply energy. They're still able to approach a problem. They may have slightly different methods of approach, but the end result is going to be the same. You see what I mean?
Absolutely. My guest this evening on Destination Unlimited, Tracey Rollin. She's the author of the new book from Red Wheel Weiser, Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, and Magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. And we'll be back with more of Tracey and this work after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Circle of Hearts Radio is a sanctuary on the airwaves. Join me, Grandmother Elia, in the circle on Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern as I share information to both enlighten and nourish your soul.
Join me, Maggie Chula, on Mondays at noon Eastern for Mastermind with Maggie. Let's work together in a mastermind. We can resolve life's problems and create goals for the future. Build action steps empowering you to create your life in partnership with your divine source of light, your soul. Manifesting your goals can be simple and easy, so come with your problems and leave with a plan. The Akashic Master Teachers and I are waiting to help you.
In the wake of a disaster, what one thing can you send that will help people the most? A blanket, a tent, a sandbag, a doctor. Actually, if you send a monetary donation, you send all these things. Even a small donation can make a big impact and can quickly become exactly what people affected by disaster need most.
In the wake of a hurricane, your monetary donation can make a huge difference to those in need. To donate, visit supporthurricanerelief.org. That's supporthurricanerelief.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
When it comes to saving money, don't act like a baby.
Goo goo gaga.
Be the boss and make a budget.
I'm the boss, baby.
You're the boss of me.
I am the boss of you.
Are not.
M2.
Are not.
M2.
Need a little help?
Aren't you going to do any work?
I'm very busy delegating.
Create a personalized savings plan.
We could share.
You obviously didn't go to business school.
And get other tools and tips at feedthepig.org. Brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this evening, Tracey Rollin. She's the author of the new book, Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, and Magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. How were you first introduced to Santa Muerte?
My introduction to Santa Muerte was actually utterly by chance. I like using a lot of novena candles and 7-day pillar candles in general. And here in New Mexico, I live in Albuquerque. They are easily available in grocery stores. So I went to the grocery store about, almost 10 years ago at this point, and I was buying just a bunch of plain candles, and I glanced at the row of saints that were below me, and there were a lot. And I looked all the way down at the bottom shelf, and I saw an entire shelf dedicated to a single saint whom I'd never heard of. Some really friendly-looking female skeleton, a Lady Grim Reaper, named Santa Muerte. And I'd never heard of her, even though I was raised Catholic, and I was raised Catholic in New Mexico. So I went ahead and I picked up one of the candles and I took it home. And I still had my rosary from when I was a little girl. So I took it out and said a rosary. I even said it in a Catholic fashion, calling upon the Virgin Mary and so forth. And I asked her to reveal herself to me because I had no idea who she was. Honestly, I didn't expect anything at all to happen. A couple days later, I have a friend who is really good, who really likes going to rummage sales, garage sales, She comes over to my house because she'd been out that weekend, and she found a whole big box of Halloween stuff that she just thought I would love. Well, I go digging through it, and underneath all the rubber bats and spiders and things, what do I find? A Santa Muerte statue, and a bunch of prayer guides. A couple days later, she asked her to reveal herself to me, and sure she did. So if something works, wouldn't you keep doing it?
Absolutely.
Oh, I would.
Absolutely. So you found that connection, and you called to her, and she came to you. Now, when you think of Santa Muerte and the representation of this energy, this being, we think also about the African powers that were brought over through Yoruba and Voodoo and these types of things. Is there an association between them?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, you'll see this association commonly made between the different color models of Santa Muerte. The color model that I present in my book is the expanded color model. There are 7 different colors that I recognize. However, there is a more traditional and frankly older model that only recognizes 3 colors. 3 colors that are recognized in the more traditional model are white, black, and red. And you'll still see practitioners, throughout, Mexico and certainly throughout the Southwest United States will refer to this model. However, the 7-color model is a lot more popular. The reason I like to use it is because, frankly, I think it gives you better access to a broad portfolio of powers. But where it actually came from is a matter of debate. A lot of folks think it's a carryover from like Santeria and whatnot, where you just mentioned like the 7 African powers. And where that would have been imported from Mexico directly from Africa would actually have been after the conquest of Mexico by the Spaniards. To not put too fine a point on it, unfortunately, they killed most of the local natives. If they didn't, kill them with plague or violence, they simply worked them to death. So when the Spaniards needed people to work their plantations, they imported West African slaves. And, well, the same beliefs that were brought into, Haiti and Dominican Republic and Brazil, and, southern United States were also brought into Mexico. So where you have, the 7-color model popping up, like in Santeria and Voodoo, you have it also popping up in this Santa Muerte mythos.
Now, we'll talk a little more about the aspects in a couple of minutes, but when we think of Santa Muerte as the central figure in Mexico's Day of the Dead, but in your book you actually share that she's a manifestation and she's ancient, dating back to the Aztecs. Please share the history of Santa Muerte.
Absolutely. Well, the Day of the Dead festival itself is very old. It actually goes back almost 3,000 years, during which they would recognize and celebrate a lot of their gods of death, okay? Now, the idea of death and sacrifice was central to the Aztec culture, and I kind of like the idea of this, and the reason why is everyone thought that they were living on borrowed time. They had to go and take food from the earth, they had to take back from the earth, and they had to give back to the earth when they died, okay? So because of that, that was how they found themselves in balance with nature, was through their concept of death and sacrifice. So because of that, their gods of death were very important. And one goddess in particular, a goddess named Mictecacicatl, was arguably one of the most important of them all. She resided at the bottom of their underworld, and the Aztecs believed that they had to travel to the bottom of the underworld in order to go to her obsidian palace, to reside in her cold and stony womb, in order to await rebirth into the next age, okay? So where you see a lot of cultures who may have had a great veneration of, say, fertility or mother goddesses because of the life and power that they brought, the Aztecs in particular also saw fertility in death, in a sense, and also venerated those gods of death and sacrifice, especially since they saw themselves as living in balance with the earth through that mechanism. So the goddess Mictlantecuhtli shares a lot of characteristics with Santa Muerte. She's considered to be a very tall and noble woman, tall and very regal looking. If you look at the Codex Borgia, what is interesting about her is the Codex Borgia was one of the few books that survived the Aztec or the Spanish Purge of the Aztec libraries. And I think it's currently in Vatican Holdings, if I'm not mistaken. But the Codex Borgia shows a variety of different Aztec mother goddess types, and of the four of them, three of them are suckling animals, but the fourth one, Mictlantecuhtli, is actually suckling a sacrificed human at the same time she's pulling his own heart out of his chest and eating it. So you kind of see that cycle of balance, but it's only particular to humans and not to the rest of nature. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely.
So a very powerful deity, and it is thought that since she was in tandem with, mother goddess idea, this Tonantzin, who was their mother goddess that you normally think of, many think that the version of Guadalupe is actually an evolved form of the Aztec mother goddess Tonantzin. Just as I was mentioning earlier, how the Virgin Mary may be an evolved form of Isis. And they actually think that Santa Muerte is the evolved form of this Aztec mother goddess, or death mother goddess, Mictlantecuhtli.
So it's fascinating that in virtually every culture around the world, the mother goddess image is brought forth into the modern faiths and the modern religions and venerated just as strongly as they were in the early religions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, we all come from somewhere. One question that some people sometimes ask me is, why would we venerate a death mother goddess as opposed to a more fertile life figure? A lot of people don't seem to realize and not often link together that death and life are intrinsically one and the same. Childbirth for the longest time has been a leading cause of death for women worldwide. So at the same time that women would be reaping and bringing new life into the world, they may be reaped themselves. So bringing a more balanced idea of death and change into the equation, I think, is actually very healthy.
It establishes the cycle of nature that's gone on from the beginning of time.
Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does.
And it's interesting, you mentioned the Aztecs being the sacrificial, the acts of sacrifice and giving back to the earth, gifts of blood, for example, and how in virtually every shamanic culture there's an understanding that as we take from the earth, we have to give back to the earth, not necessarily in blood, but in some form of gift.
Absolutely. And that's carried over now and still working with Santa Muerte. If you ask Santa Muerte to do something for you, it is absolutely expected that you give her a gift back. It doesn't have to be big or expensive, just like you were saying. It doesn't certainly need to be a blood sacrifice. But certainly the gift of your time or attention is absolutely required. Absolutely required.
What about things like you see in other indigenous faiths where there's gifts of, for example, food, or gifts of the bounty of the earth, or wine or something of that nature? Is that also part of the practice?
Absolutely it is. Gifts of food and drink are very common to Santa Muerte. The idea is with Santa Muerte is that she's a very friendly form of death, that she actually likes people. Okay, she likes people, she likes their antics, she likes the things that they do. She also likes a lot of their vices. After all, it's not like cigarettes and alcohol are going to kill her, right? She's the power of death. So it's very common, since you're trying to establish a friendly and convivial relationship and a strong relationship with the spirit, is to treat her like a friend. And certainly if you came over to my house, Victor, I would certainly offer you food and drink, certainly the best that I have. And I would expect if I came over to your house, you'd certainly offer me a beer, wouldn't you? It's the same kind of logic and same kind of rationale, and you have to treat her that way. You have to treat her as a friend, and you'll get friendly results in return.
Is tobacco employed in that?
It absolutely is. Tobacco is actually a very traditional Aztec sacrifice. They did smoke some tobacco, but in ritual settings, they would actually burn huge quantities of it. I'm talking giant platters, like you might imagine your Thanksgiving turkey on. And in quantities that large, it was actually a hallucinogen. Wow. I would not recommend using hallucinogens, but there you go.
Is that comparable to the use in certain practices of cigars?
Absolutely. I do smoke cigarettes ritually for Santa Muerte. I know I'm a terrible smoker, terrible. But I will often go ahead and give her like 3 puffs and put it in her mouth. I have heard of people who say if they're casting, say, a negative spell or a curse or something, they'll actually smoke the cigarette in reverse and put the hot end in their mouth. I haven't done this myself, but I've seen it. And then blow it on the statue. Sometimes you'll see it kind of a stand-in as almost like a fire wand or a fire element. Sometimes you'll see like a wand in traditional magic or classical magic being a symbol of the magician's will, symbol of fire. The same kind of concept with a cigarette.
What are the most important aspects of Santa Muerte?
I would have to say the most important aspect of Santa Muerte would be the degree of power relative that she holds to everything else. One of the things I mentioned in my book is that she's a Lord of the World type figure. Death is a very fundamental and very necessary part of the equation of life and of anything, as we mentioned a few minutes ago. In some versions of Genesis, as a matter of fact, right after God basically creates light, he creates death before he creates anything else, because death and decay create the possibility of change. One of the things that you'll see on a Santa Muerte statue very frequently is she's holding a globe. This represents her universal and complete power over everything that is manifest and is subject to death and decay. Now, you name me a list of the things that are not subject to and manifest to death and decay. It's a very short list, okay? As a result, since Santa Muerte has power over virtually everything that you can imagine, she has that kind of power and ability to help you and access virtually everything you can imagine. I'm not even talking about necessarily material things, although certainly that's included. But if you were looking for education or initiation or spiritual growth through change, that is what she brings. That is the other gift that she has. She is actually the greatest helper of witches and magicians who are trying to advance their spiritual practices.
And we'll talk more about the aspects of Santa Muerte with my guest, Tracey Rollin. She's the author of the new book, Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, Magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. Tracey, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about your work.
I would love to. My book can be found on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, certainly any of your local independent bookstores and retailers. It is published by Red Wheel Weiser Press. If you'd like to find out more information about me or about my book, or maybe see some sample spells and rituals I have centered around Santa Muerte, you can go to my website. That is TraceyRollin.com, Tracey, Rollin, ROLLIN.com. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm very responsive. My Twitter handle is Tracey Rollin with an underscore before and after it. And certainly you can also find me on Facebook through my Facebook group, Lovely Mother Death, where I have about 69,000 followers.
And we'll be back with more of Tracey Rollin and the story of Santa Muerte after these words from the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Hello, it's me, the designer jeans in the back of your closet. What happened to us? I used to summer in the Hamptons, and now I'm stuck behind a pair of sweats. Okay, maybe I never really fit you right, but I got a lot more Sunday fun days left in me. So take me to Goodwill, where I can really make a difference.
Your donations to Goodwill create jobs, training programs, and education assistance for people in your community. To find your nearest donation center, go to goodwill.org. Donate stuff. Create jobs. A message from Goodwill and the Ad Council.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest this evening, Tracey Rollin. She's the author of Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, and Magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. So earlier in the program, we were talking about the different aspects of Santa Muerte. And in your book, you describe the 7 aspects of Santa Muerte and how each is associated with a color. What do each of these aspects represent, and what are the colors?
Like I think I mentioned in your previous segment, Santa Muerte is an extremely powerful figure who has influence over just about anything you can think of. Because of that, I find her 7-color model is more useful to use because that's a lot of territory to cover. Like I said, 7 colors. They're not quite the colors of the rainbow. The 7 different colors are white, black, either a gold or an amber. You'll see it done either way. Green, blue, red, and purple. Okay. Each of these colors represents a different kind of sphere of influence that she has control over. For example, if I was having legal trouble, if I was getting sued, I would access her green aspect, which has to do with matters of justice and balance, in order to come out on top during the lawsuit. But if I was having a issue where I need to start a new love affair, for example, I would access the power of the red aspect of Santa Muerte, who is usually concerned with love, relationships, and actually strength and coercion, oddly enough. She's a very martial Mars kind of figure.
And what are some of the other colors represent?
Absolutely. The white aspect of Santa Muerte usually represents new beginnings, purity, and restoration. Sometimes people will invoke her to heal themselves. That's a very common thing. Whenever you're trying to clear some kind of negative personal condition, like say you're very depressed for some reason, okay? Going to Santa Muerte and asking for a reset and going to a clean slate, going to the white aspect would actually be very useful. The purple aspect of Santa Muerte is frankly one of my favorite aspects of Santa Muerte if I had to pick a favorite. She is the one who is concerned with magical understanding, spiritual insight, psychic intuition, that kind of thing. So if you're trying to seek initiation, if you're trying to understand, yourself and how you relate to the universe and your path in it, the purple aspect of Santa Muerte is absolutely the way to go. She also tends to govern matters of royal authority and force. I work in hospital administration currently, and I have to sometimes face down doctors who are 30 years my senior and very much know it. And I like the purple aspect of Santa Muerte, let me just say that. Other aspects of Santa Muerte would certainly include the blue aspect of Santa Muerte. That is related to more personal, practical relationships, family relationships, for example, husband between wife, wife between children, business people between their customers, that kind of thing. Also relates to practical learning. A lot of people, I mentioned I have a Facebook group where I've got a lot of followers on it. A lot of people ask me for prayers of the blue aspect of Santa Muerte to help their children in school. That's really common, really, really common. Like I said, red aspect is love and sex. The gold aspect is popular, let me tell you. The gold aspect of Santa Muerte has to do a lot with money and gambling. People who need a new job or need a certain lucky break love to go to the gold aspect of Santa Muerte. A lot of people will also use her as the power of healing, believe it or not. There is a tandem relationship between the concept of money, especially the coinage metals like gold and silver, and the power of death, and how they actually relate to life in an inverse relationship. Finally, the last aspect of Santa Muerte would be the black aspect of Santa Muerte, Niña Negra. She is often used to deal with curse breaking. She's a very protective figure. She's also one that you would use to communicate with spirits of the dead and open up doorways into other spiritual realms. You can use Santa Muerte as a gatekeeper to summon and attract and deal with other spirits, and that would be the one I would use.
So if someone had a mediumistic practice, they would work with the black aspect, is that right?
The black and the purple, because the purple would help with the psychic intuition and the wisdom and being able to understand and interpret what it is that they're getting, and also to strengthen their psychic gifts. And also with the black aspect as well, suppose if they were trying to summon and communicate with spirits of the dead.
Let's say that I wanted to work with Santa Muerte to get a new career. What would be a typical practice for that?
I would start off with the blue aspect of Santa Muerte for that. The reason why is you're looking to form a long-term community relationship with somebody, like your new boss, for example, or find a new boss that you like. Okay, maybe that's the reason why you're leaving your job, because you didn't like your work environment for whatever reason. So what I would do is I would get a Santa Muerte picture or statue of some kind, ideally a blue one, although a 7-color one would work fine. A lot of folks will use a white Santa Muerte statue as a stand-in for all the others if they don't have anything else, and that's okay too. I would also get a blue candle from somewhere. Again, blue is a theme here. And I would say at least once daily, at least in the morning most likely, and this is because of my magical viewpoint and style. If you believe that starting new career paths would be better suited at being done at noon, by all means, do it at noon. Okay, this is a chaos magician in me speaking. Okay, just because I say doing it at dawn, which is when I would do it, because that's when the new day starts. If you feel it would be better at noon, do it at noon. Understand? So, but what you would do is you would petition her over a number of days, at least 3, and say, Santa Muerte, I need this thing, I need this new job, I need to pay a certain amount of money, I need to be close to my home, I need to not have a terrible boss, what have you. It doesn't have to be very structured. Some people do these elaborate rituals. Some people literally just go walk in and start talking to their statue. Earlier I said that it's essential that you form a very friendly relationship with Santa Muerte. And if you and I are friends, I just go walking into your living room, I'm like, Victor, I've got a problem. I don't have an elaborate ritual before I talk to you. You see what I mean? It's the same kind of logic. And then once she gives you your new thing, your new job, you have to give her something in return, which is also something that we mentioned earlier, that idea of balance and sacrifice. It doesn't have to necessarily be very big. One thing I might suggest is go in your first paycheck, offer to buy her a bottle of tequila. After all, you got to celebrate, right?
There you go.
And then you go ahead and you sit down with her and you actually drink some of the tequila with her. Another one of the keys.
So again, in terms of the chaos magic aspect, what we're talking about is the most important thing is the clear intention of what your goal is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Magic never works well if you add extra layers of abstraction to it.
Absolutely. Now, let's say that I work with or I'm surrounded by a lot of people who are energy vampires. How would I approach Santa Muerte to be protected against those energy vampires?
You could go one of 2 directions with that, depending how you personally felt you should handle it given the situation. Direction A would be to invoke a shield of protection by the white aspect of Santa Muerte. Use terms like her actually covering you with her mantle. That is something that's very commonly used, like being covered with her cloak of death. And if she's covered with a white cloak of power, basically it's almost like a white energy shield, you can imagine, a lot of people will use. Ask her to empower that and ask her to surround you with that, and the energy vampires, they can't attach. Okay, just every attempt they make just simply bounces. That would be one way of doing it. Another way of doing it would be to invoke the power of the black aspect of Santa Muerte. Okay, so you're walking around also covered in her mantle of protection, but when the energy vampire leeches out, this aspect of Santa Muerte is aggressive, all right? She will go and reach out with her scythe and she'll simply cut it off at the root. That may have a negative effect on the energy vampire, but it may also teach them a lesson.
And to ward off negativity, also the black aspect?
Absolutely, absolutely. She has a tendency of stopping things or cutting things off at the root. So if you have a situation that you simply just don't like, for whatever reason, you can go to the black one and say, I want this to stop today. And it will, one way or another.
That's fascinating. Now, you described one of the aspects of Santa Muerte as healing. Have you called upon her in your work as a nurse?
Absolutely, I have. Absolutely, I have. Not only to assist patients, but also to assist patients in their passing.
Can you share one of those examples? I've also had the practice of working with families and people who are in transition and hospice and helping them to cross over. I'd love to hear your way of doing this.
This is actually sort of a sad story, so I'm sorry if I make you a little sad by it, but it's very emblematic of Santa Muerte's power and how merciful that she is. I was working in the emergency department, and one night, I work nights, they brought in a patient from one of the local prisons who was actively dying of cancer. And when patients die in custody, like actually in a prison, it triggers a state investigation. So often they'll bring the prisoners into the ER to die instead, okay, because then it doesn't trigger the investigation. So they bring this poor guy in, and he was delirious, he was in pain, he was actively dying, and he had 4 guards with him. And those guards were basically making fun of the poor guy. And I walked in the room, and I was pretty angry, and I asked him to go. I asked Santa Muerte to please do something about these guards. I just wanted them to stop right now. And it was the black aspect of Santa Muerte that I asked. And a few minutes later, one of the guards got up and he took a phone call. He walked out of the room. Then another guard announced that he had to go to the bathroom, and he wandered off. And then some guy just wandered off looking at his phone. And finally, the 4th guard just wandered out of the room, too. Now, this guy, I'll grant you, was unconscious and chained to a bed. He wasn't going anywhere. But it was absolutely illegal for them to leave him out of custody. But they did. And I was able to sit with that guy and let him die in peace. And he wasn't being mocked by a bunch of guards who were laughing at him and telling him that they wanted to go home. And I never...
And how did the energy of Santa Muerte to come to receive him, how did that manifest?
The light in the room, I'm not going to lie to you, got a certain intensity of form, it seemed, okay? And the guy, he was laying there, and he was in pain, and I was giving him, medication, trying to help him, but he was dying of terminal cancer. There was only so much I could do. You've been in hospice situations. You've seen this, I'm sure.
Yes.
And I sat by him, and I kept on saying, Santa, just help him. Just help this poor guy. I didn't know what he was in prison for. I didn't care. This wasn't cool, And I remember the light got a certain kind of intensity, almost like... I almost don't even know how to describe it. It's almost like being in a movie or something. And the guy's face got very, very peaceful, and his eyes opened up. And I saw that he saw something, and he wasn't looking at me. And whatever he saw, he wasn't afraid of it. I remember that.
So she welcomed him.
I would have to say that. He opened up his eyes. Whatever he saw, he was not afraid of. Okay, he didn't look like he was in pain for once. He wasn't being mocked. He looked like he was at peace, and he was not afraid. And then his eyes just rolled back, and that was it.
Fascinating. My guest is Tracey Rollin. She's the author of the new book, Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, and Magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. And we'll be back with more of Tracey after these words from the OMTimes Radio Network.
Change and growth are part of natural life, and also part of your spiritual life. Everyone needs support and guidance, especially during life passages. Upgrade yourself with the OMTimes Experts program. With OMTimes Experts, you have access to the best intuitive coaches, spiritual teachers, counselors, astrologists, and oracles. Our team was carefully selected so you can trust. Find out more at experts.omtimes.com.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Buffett. How would you like to meet an endangered manatee? You can by joining Save the Manatee Club's Adopt the Manatee program. You can't take them home, but you can get to know your new manatee friend through the photo, biography, and information the club sends to you. And you can read updates on your manatee in the club newsletter. More importantly, your contribution goes to programs that are working to save manatees from extinction. It's easy to help. Call 1-800-432-JOIN.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest this evening, Tracey Rollin. She's the author of Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, and Magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. Tracey, why does Santa Muerte have such a great appeal to the marginalized?
One of the things that the marginalized, because they're marginalized, tend to feel is that they just gotten the short end of the stick in society, okay? They're not popular enough, they don't have the connections, they don't have the money, they don't have the right family, they're not the right nationality, the right color, the right anything, okay? And they're not the ones in power, and they're not being allowed to get power, and they're just being kept down, you know? Death, however, is a great equalizer. Death knocks equally at the doors of kings as it does at the doors of beggars, okay? Death does not care who you are, okay? Death does not care if you're rich. Death does not care if you're poor. Death does not care if you're Catholic. Death does not care. And because of that, appealing to death becomes a universal. The idea of death becoming appealing is a universal one because it is something that everyone must face, all right? Everyone dies of cancer someday, or a heart attack, or something. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if you understand and feel like you get the power of death on your side, especially because of your marginalized status, you feel that you're at the risk of violence or dying. People who work at night, for example, and I'm not talking necessarily about say prostitutes or something. I'm just simply a cab driver who works nights in Brooklyn is far more likely going to get, robbed, stabbed, beaten, what have you, than someone who works in the afternoon. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So why is this guy working at night? Well, nobody chooses to work in the middle of the night, usually. I'm one of the weird ones because I choose to work at night as a nurse, but most folks don't. And there you have it. All the marginalized folks, all under the Señora de la Nuestra, the Lady of the Night, Santa Muerte.
And the appeal to those who are in a line of work in which their life is imperiled on a regular basis.
Absolutely. One of the things I find interesting about working with Santa Muerte and the power of death in general, we are taught in our culture that death is a very frightening thing. Okay, it's very ugly. The Grim Reaper is a bad person or a bad creature, a scary scythe and all this. Hollywood tells us this, graveyards are terrible places, And if you ask me, that's a very unhealthy way of looking at things. Frankly, it's nonsense. To me, a graveyard is a place where you bury your grandparents, okay? It's a place full of grandparents. That's not a bad place, okay? I liked my grandparents, We're all going to die someday, all right? I don't know about you. I believe in reincarnation. Some folks believe that they're going to go to heaven after they die. Well, if you're going to reincarnate, you gotta die. Okay, so there's nothing really to be afraid of. It's just really the next step on your great big adventure, really. So if you know that you're going to die, and you know that you can die at any moment, it's a lot healthier to deal with that fact and to accept that fact and embrace that fact than running around being afraid every moment that something's going to happen to you, especially if you're in a perpetually dangerous situation. You're a cop that lives in a bad area, you live in a bad area of town, period. You're a soldier in Afghanistan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What is her appeal to the LGBT community?
The LGBT community frequently feels that they have been marginalized by mainstream society, frequently feel that they are at the target of violence. And now I'm not necessarily talking just physical violence. I'm also talking about social violence, too. Okay, being passed over for job promotions, people crossing in front of the street, people telling their children, oh, don't look at those two men kissing over there. That's disgusting, okay? You don't want to hear that kind of thing. It's social violence, Why do that to people? When you feel like you've been marginalized for something as simple as loving someone else, or in the case of gay marriage, agreeing to pay taxes because you love somebody else, it's very appealing to know that there is a spiritual power that is not going to reject you, okay? I mentioned gay marriage a moment ago. You can't go into a lot of churches. Some you can. There's still a lot that you can't say, hey, me and my girlfriend, we've been together for 10 years. We'd like to make it formal, You feel marginalized because you're kept out of, the houses of worship. You're kept out of, houses of play. You're kept out of, places of business. Again, marginalized just for these social reasons. So if there's a spiritual power who can help you overcome all of this, because she has so much power over all of the world, and she's going to accept you no matter what, because everyone's going to die. She doesn't care, what you did, who you've done, what you love. You see what I mean?
Absolutely.
Santa Muerte is extremely appealing.
Now, you mentioned this worldwide. How has devotion to Santa Muerte gone beyond the boundaries of Mexico and reached out to all parts of the world?
One of the most interesting places I ever got a Santa Muerte statue was from Turkey. I had a friend whose father lived in Turkey. He was a British expatriate, and he went to go visit his father, and he was in a market there. And he sends me a message on WhatsApp, and sure enough, they had Santa Muerte statues for sale in Turkey. And I asked him, I had him ask the merchant there, what did they think it was? Okay, because maybe, it's just a female Grim Reaper, they don't know, And the guy looks at him, this Turkish merchant, he's like, it's Santa Muerte. Sure enough.
That's interesting that in a mostly Muslim country, one would find this.
Mm-hmm. But sure enough, sent me from Turkey. You will find the Day of the Dead celebration popping up in the Philippines now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Santa Muerte pops up there. People often ask me how big the cult of Santa Muerte is. The numbers given by Dr. Chestnut, he's the guy who wrote Devoted to Death. It's a big academic work that's, I believe it's a New York Times bestseller, if I'm not mistaken. He quotes that there are about 10 to 12 million devotees of Santa Muerte in the world today. To put that figure in context, the Mormon Church only claims 15.8 million members. So, yeah, it's almost as big as that.
Wow. How would you describe your personal relationship with Santa Muerte?
My personal relationship with Santa Muerte, I would have to describe her as the older best friend grandmother that I never really had. Okay? I feel that Santa Muerte, when I've asked her for advice, I will tend to ask her things that are open-ended, like I really don't know where I want to go with, this next portion of my career, for example, okay? And I will just leave it in her hands, okay? Because I know generally what I want. I want to make more money and not get harassed by people, not like anybody else, right? And let's leave it in her hands. I don't say that I want this particular job or I want to get rid of this one boss. And things just work out because Santa Muerte took care of it, because I took care of her. Do you see what I mean? So I spent a lot of time taking care of my Santa Muerte statues and listening to music for her and eating my dinner with her and what have you. And she takes care of me in a very all-encompassing kind of way, okay? I don't feel like I have to strain or reach to cast protection spells. I don't feel like I have to strain or reach to get my will done because she's always there as a constant presence. And that's how I'd have to describe it. And honestly, knowing that anything could happen to me at any moment and that death is already right next to me, in a sense, I really don't feel afraid of much. I really don't. And it's a very freeing feeling. It's very freeing.
Absolutely. How does one start a relationship with Santa Muerte?
You just have to ask her. It's very simple. Santa Muerte is, like I said, death dogs are every step, so Santa Muerte is always there. Okay. Oftentimes people will go and start up a little altar to Santa Muerte. You don't have to be big or expensive or elaborate. I have seen Santa Muerte altars that were totally effective that would fit on a paper plate. And did fit on a paper plate, in fact. What people will do is they'll often go and even just print out a picture from the internet or get like a little $10 statue off of Amazon or local Botanica or something. You give her a little glass of water and a little tea light, and you just say hi. Now, certainly you can give her more elaborate prayers and more elaborate thoughts. I like to do that because it has a tendency to get my mind in a certain sync of rhythm that is familiar to me. One of the reasons I like to say prayers and say them repeatedly is it's a way of self-hypnosis if you keep saying the same thing over and over again. See what I mean? Absolutely. So if you're trying to accomplish a certain goal, then that's why I'll do it. But if that's not your method or your mode or your style, or you're just trying to get started, you don't have to go elaborate prayers and all this kind of thing. Okay, but you do have to visit her altar often. At least once a day, say hi to her. Again, you're trying to form a relationship is the idea, okay? And if you have a not so great relationship, well, you're going to get not so great results. Mm-hmm.
And again, the clear intention when you ask her for something, to be clear in your intention as it is in any energy work.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that I find that tends to make spells go wrong is when the practitioner themselves didn't understand the implications of what they were asking. Okay? For example, I had this lady come up to me. She'd been married to this guy for 20-some years, had a bunch of kids with him. The last kid had just left the house. And her marriage was falling apart because he had found a younger and newer model, and he wasn't interested in hanging out with her, and they'd gone to a marriage counselor and all kinds of things. And she wanted to come to me and find out how to use the red aspect of Santa Muerte to totally fix her marriage. So I start asking her some detailed questions, trying to diagnose what really the problem with her marriage was. And what she told me he had told the marriage counselor is that she had ignored him, that she hadn't really done anything herself with her life, or it seemed to be all about the kids, and now that, the kids are out of the house, she just wanted to sit around. I mean, she'd become a lump. He was disinterested. He'd fallen out of love. He found somebody else. Okay? So she's telling me this story, and I'm like, okay, I can go ahead and absolutely help you with this red aspect of Santa Muerte, with this Nina Roja, we can do this thing. However, what are you doing to actually fix the fundamental problems of your marriage? Okay, because you cannot build a house on an unstable foundation. Okay? And she's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, you still have no hobbies, you still have no interest in him, you still treat him like a walking wallet. If that's what you think love is, you've got a problem, honey. Okay? And if you want to keep your situation, keep him in your marriage, and keep him in the way that he is unhappy, you don't need the red aspect of Santa Muerte. You need the black to bind him and destroy his will. And when I told her that, she got very upset with me because, well, I love him. I'm like, do you really? Yeah. And, well, there it was. But oftentimes spells will collapse like that because people don't really understand what they're asking.
Be clear with your intention, the secret to everything in life. My guest this evening, Tracey Rollin. She's the author of Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, and Magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. Tracey, please tell our listeners one more time where they can get your book and find out more about you and this work.
Absolutely, I would love to. You can absolutely get my book on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Basically any place where you can buy the written word online. You can also get my book at your local independent bookseller. Please support your local indie bookshops. You can find out more about me and read a little bit more about my book at my website, www.TraceyRollin.com. That's TraceyRollin.com. And you can also find me on Twitter. I'm very responsive. My Twitter handle is Tracey Rollin with an underscore back and front. And you can also find me on my Facebook group, Lovely Mother Death.
Tracey, thank you so much for joining us tonight and telling us about Santa Muerte. We really appreciate the information that you shared with us this evening.
Oh, and thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you, and I thank your listeners for having a listen.
And thank all of you for joining us tonight on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.